All right, this song is in the key of A minor, and there are a lot of 2-5-1 progressions in this. Minor 2-5s, 2-5s leading up to major chord. And this is a great opportunity to explore some of these triads. We can use triads as the basis for our melodic lines. So instead of thinking about scales, which is fine, that's one way to approach improv, but we can also kind of think of the chord progression from the standpoint of triads based from the root, so we can just call those maybe chord triads, so an A minor on top of an A minor 7th chord. And we can also think of upper structure triads. So if we have an A minor 7th chord, in addition to A minor, our core triad, we also can play a C major triad and an E minor triad. And those will give us sounds they just sound perfect. And especially if you're playing a slower tempo, maybe a ballad or a slow bossa, like in this case, it just gives room for those color notes to breathe a little bit. And it's nice to get into the tonal side of things with your dynamic and your pick attack and all of that stuff. So let's take a look at what's going on in the first 8 bars here. So we just basically have a series of 2-5s in A minor. So what's going on? We're just hitting it right out of the gate. A minor triad. Rhythmically, it's almost like kind of a clave pattern that we can just kind of stick in on this. But what's going on here, I wanted to show is that there's a couple of things going on. This is in the key of A natural minor, so to speak. So that means Aeolian, flat 6, and those are the triads that we want to use. So we have A minor and D minor. And D minor is also the upper structure of B half diminished, right? Because if we have B half diminished chord, our chord triad is B diminished, of course. But if we start that on the flat 3rd D, it's D minor, which is the same as the triad pair that we have going in A minor, Aeolian. So I'm thinking of this whole thing as just basically a triad pair of A minor to D minor. And then we just kind of finish it off with a 9th line, E7 flat 9. Now notice this in the 3rd bar, just for a little bit of color here, we're throwing in the Dorian triad pair for A minor. So those triads would be A minor and B minor. So we're just superimposing a B minor there, and then quickly going back to the F natural over B, which of course is a chord tone. So we're jumping very quickly between the Dorian triad pair of A minor and B minor to A minor and D minor, and then finishing it off by outlining an E7 chord. All right, so then in the next 4 bars, we have a 2-5 to the relative major of C major here. So we're doing that with some upper structure ideas over the D minor 7. We've got an idea that's based on F. And then we're doing an E triad on top of the G7. It's kind of like a 13 flat 9 idea. And in fact, if you look at that common chord voicing, there it is. It's an E major triad on top of a G7 chord. So we can outline that in the context of a line. So we're just going down chromatically F major over the D minor, and then E major over the G7. And then we'll finish that off with an upper structure triad on the C major 7. That's a G major. And then we use an A major on the C sharp diminished chord, which sometimes that's notated as an A7 or a C sharp diminished. It doesn't matter. We can use an A7 flat 9 voicing on that, or even reduce it to an A triad like we're doing here. All right, the next 4 bars, we're just utilizing upper structures. So we have an A minor triad on top of that D. And that's really nice because it accents the 9, right? Then we're going back to an E major triad on G. And then we have a G major triad on C. And then we have a C major triad on F. So it's basically this sound. Sometimes these chords are called hybrid sounds when you superimpose an upper structure on top of another chord, especially if it doesn't have a 3rd in it. So in the case of C major over F, right, or any triad, the upper structure that's built on the 5th, there's no 3rd of the core chord on there. And that's kind of nice because it can create like this real kind of ambiguous sound, you know. There's no third in that, so it could be, it sounds mostly like F major 9, but there's not a third in there, so it's a really unique sound. So that's all that's going on in those 4 bars and in the following 4 bars, just upper structure triads built on the 3rd or the 5th of each chord. Now, taking a look at the last 2 bars of this phrase, now we have a series of triads moving up. So the chords are A minor, B half diminished to E7, and we're basically going up the triads of A melodic minor. So we've got B minor, C augmented, and then D minor. So now it's switching back to A natural minor to line up with that B half diminished. That's important because there's an F on that. So we can, again, on A minor, we can explore minor major 7 sounds, minor 6 sounds, Dorian sounds, melodic minor. But as soon as we hit that B half diminished, we have to revert back to Aeolian. And that's pretty easy to do through a triad pair of what's happening is we've got D minor over the B, and then over the E7 chord, E7 flat 9, we can use a triad pair of E major and F major. So the major triads built on the root and the flat 9, half step above, easy peasy. So if you've got an E7 flat 9, you can just go E, F all day. And then take it home to A minor. So that's a fun one to use, and that's what's happening there in all of those triplets. Then in our next 2/5, we're doing some more upper structure triads. We've got C major on top of A minor, and we're just building a line using these triad shapes. And it's again kind of that minor idea that we saw earlier in the How Deep is the Ocean etude. So we've got a B major triad superimposed to B half diminished, and you might be thinking, wait a minute, what? Why would you do that? And the answer is the line itself is so strong that we can get away with it because there's continuity there. This is something that Jim Hall would do a lot of times. He would just ignore the minor 7 flat 5 sound and say, I'm just going to do a major triad in the context of a moving line. And that's exactly what's happening here. B flat triad happening over the E7 like we saw earlier with the dominant diminished approach. All right, the next time we see a triad pair is in the next 4-bar sequence here. Now we have a 2/5 leading us to D minor. So we've got E half diminished, A7, flat 9 to D minor. So over that A7 flat 9, we're going to do that same flat 9 triad pair idea. We've got A major and B major. So all I'm doing is arpeggiating those triads to make a line. And I could keep going. But in this case, we resolve it back to D minor and then just finish it off with a triad. Okay, bringing this home, the last 8 bars of the etude is just simple upper structure triads in every single case. So we have, a triad pair of D minor. We've got D minor and C major over that. Sculpting lines using triads as a basis. We're using, over the B half diminished, we're using our D minor, and we're also using F major over that, which gives us a really nice sound. Following just that F over B resolves really nicely into an E over E7. Then when we get back to our final A minor 7 chord, instead of just landing on an A minor 7 arpeggio or triad idea or something like that, I go right to the E minor triad. So that's the upper structure based on the 5th. Just kind of softens the sound a little bit. It's nice and mellow. And I do the same thing on the last 2/5 there. Back to A minor, and then D major on E7. And that just gives us a completely different sound. I mean, listen, this is how much color you can get from these triads if we have E7 with an F on top of it. That's a very different sound from E7 with a D on top of it. So there's a lot of colors that you can access by simply implementing different triad types over any of these chords. So this one ends with kind of a soft sound, E minor on top of A, and then D on top of E7. And then we bring it back home to A minor.